Morning, Boker Tov. Nice to see everybody. Um, so we are beginning a new study, which is really a continuation of what we've been doing for the past month. We're going to be going through June and July, reading the stories of the children of Israel traveling through the desert in the Torah with commentaries and discussing, and it's been and you know what, we can take in different directions. If anybody wants to bring some elements in, we can really bring it alive. I guess before we even begin, I'd be curious how many of you would be interested to going into in person, or would be able to come.
We're going to be gone in July. We're leaving in July.
Okay. Going to Spain?
Yeah, for 2 months.
Okay. Probably hotter here than in Spain in the July, August.
Yeah.
Right now, they've got their temperatures are in the 90s. It's very unusual to be that hot, and they haven't had rain since December.
Oh.
They're in a drought. Yeah, that's very hot there.
So anybody else? I only saw Alan. Anybody else? You rather continue on Zoom? Anybody else?
I'd go either way.
Okay. Tov. Okay.
Yeah.
Morris, go ahead. You're about to say?
No, yeah, either way would work for me, I think.
Okay. And so we're going to continue the stories and kind of talk through the commentaries and get to know the commentators a little bit better, and who they are, what they're thinking, and the stories come alive. We finished last time at this. They arrived at they were arriving at the mountain after all the grumbling and after fighting off. And we're going to skip some of the stuff. Maybe we can go back later, but we're going to skip the golden calf. We're going to skip a few of those things. And we're going to start a year later. It's been a whole year, but what a year for the children of Israel. They received the Torah, they received laws, they're a new people. And now they're ready to move on and start traveling to the promised land. We're going to be beginning at chapter 10 of the book of Numbers. So in between where we stopped last time, which was, the beginning to middle of Exodus, they've gone through the second half of Exodus, the golden calf, the breaking of the tablets, the new tablets, the whole book of Leviticus, all the stuff related to the laws of sacrifices and kashrut, the beginning of Numbers, and now they're beginning to travel. They're beginning to get together. And we're going to be looking at this in detail. And everybody, feel free as always to chime in. I'm going to take us to and just a quick announcement in case I forget at the end. We will be we're going to be breaking next week when I'm in Washington, D.C., and then starting again afterwards. Okay. So now I just have to share a screen. There we go. It's always Alan can get us going. Okay. We're chapter 10, verse 11 of the book of Numbers.
Okay.
The first 10 chapters of Numbers are all the preparations. How the Torah tells us how the people would travel in the desert, all the laws, that they would travel surrounding the ark. They all had their banners, they were all counted, all their donations were counted. And now finally, after 10 chapters of preparations, they're finally ready to set off.
Next question. It's in beginning of chapter 10, it says that God asked Moses to make 2 silver trumpets out of hammered metal.
Mhm.
Why would he do that? I mean, it's like, because wouldn't they have a chauffeur? Wouldn't that be easier? I mean, because they have rams and sheep and all that. And
So we can go back. I wasn't going to start there, but I think the trumpets were sometimes we think they were using the shofar blast for everything, but the truth is there were these metal trumpets both here and also at the time of the temple. They used the metal trumpets also. So the metal trumpets and the shofar kind of coexisted. The metal trumpets don't evoke as much nostalgia for us as the shofars. We love the shofars; they're beautiful. When we hear they use the metal trumpets, like we use metal trumpets, we're like, oh, whatever. For them, the metal trumpets maybe they were more technologically advanced. To them, the shofars were ancient, and they wanted to use something that was a little bit louder or more shiny. But we can quickly go look. Here we go. Let's see if Rashi has a comment on that. So we can look. No, he just says how they were to be made. See if Ibn Ezra. No, I don't see anything. So it's a good question. I'll look into it and I'll see if I find anybody who says anything. But it is, as I said, in the temple they also use the trumpets in the travels. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're starting with verse 11.
Yes, please.
In the second year, on the 20th day of the second month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the Pact, and the Israelites set out on their journeys from the wilderness of Sinai. The cloud came to rest in the wilderness of Paran. When the march was to begin, at Adonai's command through Moses, the first standard to set out, troop by troop, was the division of Judah. In command of its troops was Nachshon, son of Aminadab. In command of the tribal troop of Issachar, Netanel, son of Zuar. And in command of the tribal troop of Zebulun, Eliab, son of Hilon. Then the tabernacle would be taken apart, and the Gershonites and the Merarites who carried the tabernacle would set out. The next standard to set out, troop by troop, was the division of Reuben. In command of its troop was Elizur, son of Shedeor. In command of the tribal troop of Simeon, Shelumiel, son of Zurishaddai.
Famous Shlumiel.
Shelumiel, son of Zurishaddai. And in command of the tribal troop of God, Eliasaph, son of Deuel. Then the Kohathites, who carried the sacred objects, would set out. And by the time they arrived, the tabernacle would be set up again. The next standard to set out, troop by troop, was the division of Ephraim. In command of its troop was Elishama, son of Ammihud. In command of the tribal troop of Manasseh, Gamliel, son of Pedazur. And in command of the tribal troop of Benjamin, Abidan, son of Gideoni. Then as the rear guard of all the divisions, the standard of the division of Dan would set out, troop by troop. In command of its troop was Ahiezer, son of Ammishaddai. in command of the tribal troop of Asher, Pagiel son of Ochran, and in command of the tribal troop of Naphtali, Ahira son of Enan. Such was the order of march of the Israelites as they marched troop by troop. Moses said to Hobab son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, "We are setting out for the place of which Adonai has said, 'I will give it to you.' Come with us, and we will be generous with you, for Adonai has promised to be generous to Israel." "I will not go," he replied to him, "but will return to my native land." He said, "Please do not leave us, inasmuch as you know where we should camp in the wilderness and can be our guide. So if you come with us, we will extend to you the same bounty that Adonai grants us." They marched from the mountain of Adonai a distance of 3 days. The Ark of Covenant of Adonai traveled in front of them on that 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And Adonai's cloud kept above them day by day as they moved on from camp. When the ark was set out, Moses would say, "Advance, O Adonai, may your enemies be scattered, and may your foes flee before you." And when it halted, he would say, "Return, O Adonai, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands."
Okay. So you might notice these last two verses. The beginning is of Vayehi bin Aaron, the beginning of a Torah service. And the second verse of Nocho Yomar is the end of the Torah service. And so I wanted to bring these verses to you, even though we have those long verses of all the different heads of the tribes and everything. But what are some initial thoughts? How are they departing Sinai? What are your sense just from reading this? What are they like? How are they departing Sinai and getting ready to go to the promised land?
It seems much more organized and disciplined than when they left Egypt.
Very nice.
That they're not, it doesn't feel like they're a bunch of slaves anymore.
Beautiful. And nothing is left to chance, right? It's very detailed how they're all going to travel, the exact moment of how they're going to pack up or unpack the tabernacle.
And they seem to be more content with Moses as being their leader, and they're willing to follow.
Very nice, right? There's a togetherness. We don't hear any individual voices of grumbling yet, or of.
Am I understanding this right? But the Levites and the Cohenites and the Mershites and the Gershonites, they set out first with the tabernacle in front of all the people, in front of the tribe of Judah. Am I understanding that correctly?
So the Gershonites, the Merarites, and the Kohathites,
they're all sons.
They're different clans. Those are different clans of Levi.
Right.
There was one clan of Levi that carried the ark, and it sounds like the ark went first. But then, it was a huge tent, so they had to carry the tent, right? So the Gershonites were the lowliest clan of the Levites. They had to carry the poles. So that was not a very pleasant job, to carry the big poles of the tent through the desert. But the others carried other things, the more prestigious. We can go back to it. My sense is that the ark was always in the middle, except for not the ark, but the main objects of the tabernacle. So it sounds actually like you're right. They set out and they would camp first. They would set up the tabernacle. So
they're 3 days ahead.
Let's see. I mean, one thing to say about it, I'm going to look, but is there's a lot of detail that goes into the traveling of the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle is a very important piece of all these travels. Deduction from what we're reading right now. It's in the middle. It's given a lot of weight in the travel. It's a big part of the whole big group.
Judah.
Well, I guess if it was the home of God, it should be given a lot of weight and instruction and detail.
Okay.
Don't
Anybody
worry.
else? Yeah, really.
Judah goes out first.
Exactly.
Judah goes out first in verse 14. Then the tabernacle goes out behind Judah,
Mhm.
is how it goes.
So the typical diagram of how it's done is that the ark is in the middle and all the tribes are around the ark. That's how it's usually portrayed. Anybody else any other initial thoughts or wonders or questions? You know, how long is it going to be before they start grumbling again? So let's look at some of the initial commentaries. We're going to read this for no, it's not that interesting, but I think I wanted to read a few of these for us. Sforno. Norma, you there?
Yep. Sforno. After the ritually impure had purified themselves and had brought their Passover offering on the 14th of the second month, the trumpets were constructed so that Moses could use them to call the people to mobilize for their journey away from Mount Sinai. The Torah informs us of the order in which the 4 army units and their flags were marching, and how all this was organized with the help of the trumpets. It also described the manner in which the trumpets were used on different occasions at the temple and during times of war. When the cloud lifted off the tabernacle, it began its journey in the direction of Kadesh Barnea, which was the first town in the land of Israel, which the Israelites encountered on that journey, described as the journey across the great and awesome desert in Deuteronomy 1:19, when Moses is quoted as recalling, he arrived at Kadesh Barnea.
It's a little details about these trumpets. I just want to give us a little bit of a picture before we get into after we get through this first section, we're going to get into some very meaty stuff. But I think it's nice to paint a picture, right? So these silver trumpets are kind of important. I guess they use them to coordinate their army. I mean, try getting the whole congregation, from the sanctuary to Gottlieb for Kiddush. You know how challenging it can be. So try and move 2 million Jews across the desert, it might not be so, might be a little challenging. You have to blow a few trumpets and get people moving a little bit. All right.
I have a comment,
Sure, go ahead.
and I guess it really hit me as I was reading the Parsha for this week and preparing the Devar Torah.
Yes.
And that is, they just left slavery. They're walking through the desert. They seem to have like an almost endless supply of silver and gold for things. They have cattle and sheep and goats and other things to sacrifice. And I understand that, they don't need them for food because they have the manna coming down, but I keep thinking back to where are they getting all of these things that are mentioned in the Torah that they come up with for sacrifice and for God, and because they're walking through the desert.
Well, they took their gold and silver with them from Egypt, remember?
Yeah, they took it from the Egyptians.
But
what about the animals?
I understand they took it from the Egyptians, but they
They
already
eat those
gave
animals.
gold and silver for the tabernacle, and they used it for the golden calf, and it just seems like they keep
Well,
coming up with more and more of it.
You're imagining the desert as it is now, but back then they had Walmart in the desert.
Oh, okay.
Walmart.
It was the Diamond District on Wabash. That's what it is. 47th Street in New York. Okay, that answers my question.
Maybe God provided, Alan.
Didn't they melt down the golden calf and use that to build the tabernacle? I mean, the gold and silver that they had already collected and had already smelted into that idol, wasn't that
golden
melted down and then
golden
reused?
calf was melted down and mixed with water, and then he had them drink the water. So the golden calf, but they had a lot of gold and silver. But these issues are talked about by the commentators, and we'll see. We're going to get to it. There's a big disagreement about the commentators as we get to the next section about what meat did they have? How much cattle did they actually have? What was going on?
Feeding them? What are they feeding those cattle?
I mean, I will say that the Sinai Desert it's not the Sahara. It's not completely sand dunes. It is. The Bedouins have been living there, for thousands of years. There's areas that have more water. There's probably areas where you can buy cattle. I mean, they're traveling through it, but there's clearly other people living there, right? They come across other people here and there. So there's, it's not, on the other hand, the book of Deuteronomy describes the great and awesome desert they're traveling through. So it's hard to know. Conflicting different visions, and we'll see the commentators. I think it's interesting. It shifts our vision of what that time was like, whether we look at it more as like a big, empty, and awesome desert, whether it's more like little towns here and there that they cross through. But I think it's interesting to keep both of those in mind as we go through it. And obviously, I was joking. I don't think there was any big supermarket like area anywhere around there, and even probably smaller towns, yes, villages here and there, but nothing big. Obviously, we're also wrestling with the idea of 2 million versus if there was a more realistic number of people traveling. But I think let's keep that all in mind as we go towards it, as we go through all of it.
And on the oases that they came across, there was food.
Yeah, right. They came through those oases that had the palm trees and dates and so there's something. It's not just sand dunes. I remember from my own time in Sinai Desert that there are, especially along the coastal area, there are settlements, at least in our day. Anyway, let's go back to the commentary. I just want to quickly bring this one. Consequently, you must say that they spent at Horeb 12 months, less than 10 days. Horeb is Sinai. Okay. Norma, do you mind reading the next Rashi too?
Rashi?
Yeah.
Then the banner of the camp of the children of Dan set forward, which was the gatherer of all the camps. The Talmud, Yerushalmi Eruvin 5:1, has the following statement: because the tribe of Dan consisted of numerous troops, was more numerous than each of the other tribes except Judah, which marched on the front, chapter 11 or 2. It marched in the rear, so that if any one of the other tribes lost anything, he, Dan, restored it to him. Therefore means the one who gathered in everything belonging to all the camps. There is one authority that holds that they traveled in formation like a box in a military square, and derives this from the text Numbers 2:17. Just as they encamp, so shall they journey. And there is another authority that maintains that they traveled in a straight line like a beam, and derives this from the statement that Dan was the gatherer of all the camps.
Okay, so I want to bring a little bit of commentary on these the different things of the different tribes being in different place. So Dan might have been at the back, which means, I love this image, right? Somebody lost something, they would pick it up, and which is probably needed when you have that many people going. But what is it? Do you think it's important if they're traveling in a military square or if they're traveling in a long line? Does that evoke anything different for you? I mean,
To me, it evokes an image of protecting the ark.
beautiful, right? I mean, it's giving them a sense of purpose, right? As they're traveling, how do you keep them going and avoid chaos? It had to be really organized. Okay. Let's actually skip this comment. And I'm going to go talk about the very other thing that we read after this was Moses, his father-in-law, right? Yitro or Reuel, he has all these different names. And he says he doesn't want to travel with them. Why did he say he doesn't want to go with them?
Wants to go back to his land.
He wants to go back to his land,
Uh-huh.
right? He wants to go back to his land. Right? When they arrive at Mount Sinai, Moses sees Jethro and they have a little get together, and Jethro might be like Moses' only real friend, right? There's a feeling that his father-in-law is like his only real friend. Everybody else, he's Moses to them, but with Jethro, he can be more relaxed. And he wants Jethro to come with him, but Jethro says, sorry, I've got to continue my life. You do your life, I do my life, and good luck. Sei gesund. Let's see. Let's see what a few little comments here. This is Ramban, Nachmanides. Nancy, would you mind reading Ramban?
And Moses said unto Hobab, I have already explained at the beginning of Seder Yitro, Exodus 18, chapter 1, verse 1, that Shobab of the root Chavav, love, was the new name which they gave to Jethro when he converted to the Torah of Israel. For such is the way of all proselytes, for he calls his servants by another name. Isaiah 65:15. See my Hebrew commentary, page 230, for the source of this practice of renaming proselytes. Now Moses had begged him to go with them and had told him without explanation, and we will do thee good, in verse 29 before us. But Hobab thought that they would give him of the spoil, silver and gold, garments, sheep and herd, but that he would not have an inheritance among them in the land. Therefore, he did not want to go with them. And he answered, but I will depart to mine own land and to my kindred. Verse 30. Since there I have an inheritance, wealth, and honor. So Moses told him, leave us not, I pray thee. Verse 31. For because of your familiarity with the wilderness, thou shalt be to us instead of eyes. Verse 31. And that is a guide in the conquest of the land, and you will show us the way by which we must go up. Deuteronomy 1:22. And of all that goodness the Eternal shall do unto us, the same we will do unto thee. Verse 32. Moses thus hinted that he would be given an inheritance in the good land as a reward for his trouble and help that he would extend to them in the conquest of the land. In my opinion, Hobab consented to this offer, and he did so as Moses requested of him, as I have mentioned here, at the beginning of Seder Yitro, which is Exodus 18:1. And so the rabbi said in Yerushalmi, Bikurim 1:4, on the term Yerushalmi, see volume 3, page 192, note 44, the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, bring first fruits, and read the section of first fruits wherein it is stated, I have brought the first of the fruit of the soil which thou, O Eternal, has given to me. Deuteronomy 26:10, because it is written, come thou with us and we will do thee good.
Okay, thank you. Not an easy little bit to read with all the quotes. So what's happening here? I think the big question is who is traveling with them and not with them. We have different traditions, and we do have a tradition that some of Jethro's sons, the Kenites, traveled with him, and actually the Druze in Israel, they believe that their founding prophet was Jethro, and there's grave in Israel of Jethro, that he traveled with Moses and then died. And I've been to the grave of Jethro in the north of Israel. That's the holiest place to the Druzeim. So it's an interesting idea. Who's traveling with them? Who's among them as they make this big journey across a big, wide open desert?
And it also shows that there were other people besides just the Egyptian escapees.
Exactly, right? It wasn't just the Jews, but there
Right,
were,
because he said, I'm gonna go back to my own land.
yeah,
But they
exactly.
needed him because he was the guide.
Yeah, he knew the desert, and they were about to head into the wilderness, and they needed his help.
Compass.
Exactly. Yeah. And we also have the cloud following, which is
Yeah.
important.
Hmm.
And Nancy, do you mind reading the Rashi too? The next
No,
Rashi.
Why would they need Jethro if they had God telling them or guiding them?
Hmm.
It's
Did he
a,
not- Was it like God for the big things and they needed Jethro for the details, or did they not perhaps trust everything, or it just
That-
seems surprising.
that's what I would have said, but then look what Rashi says about the cloud, and let's revisit that in a second. And Nancy, go ahead.
Okay.
And the cloud of the Lord was upon them by day. 7 times is the word, I can't read it in Hebrew. Okay, what is it in Hebrew?
None.
Used in the account of their journeys, alluding to 4 clouds which screened them on all 4 sides, one that was above them, one beneath their feet, one in front of them, which leveled the elevations and raised the depressions and killed all serpents and scorpions.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't need much of Jethro or anybody, right? If the cloud is
that's some cloud. That is some cloud. Okay, I'm going to skip over all the citations. And it came to pass when the ark proceeded that Moses said, etc., he made for this section, dividing marks, inverted
Okay.
nuns in
But
front of it.
Actually, wait, before you read this, I wanted to point this out. This is kind of something that's a little unusual and interesting. And then I do hope to get to reading the next little section too, because this is where it starts to get juicy. But so if you look at the beginning of verse 35, there's this mark here. Every single Torah in the world, you have that mark. That's an upside down letter Nun.
Yeah.
The upside down letter Nun there. And then at the end of it, verse 36, you have an upside down letter Nun.
Huh.
Why in every single Torah in the world will you have an upside down letter Nun bracketing those verses? So Rashi's about to share his theory about why that is. It's kind of I'll tell you a few other theories. So he says,
Okay.
go ahead.
He, the Lord, made for this section, dividing marks, inverted nuns in front and behind it, in order to indicate that this is not its proper place. It would more fittingly find a place in the section dealing with the march of the people in chapter Numbers 2 after verse 17, or Numbers 11 after verse 17. But why then is it written here? In order to make a break between the narrative of one punishment and that of another punishment, etc., as it is stated in the Talmudic chapter commencing with Shabbat.
So
Bamidbar.
So this is actually what the scholars say too, which is that the nuns indicate that they think maybe 2 verses are not where they originally should have been, but that the scribe, whoever was, what the scholars think is that whoever was writing down the Torah noted that, but he did not feel he had sufficient authority to put it where he thought it should go. So instead of moving it, he left it there, but put 2 marks. And then eventually that Torah was copied and copied and copied and copied. And forever those 2 nuns have been marked there for millennia. So it might be displaced. Some other interesting reason some people say is These verses are at the beginning of a Torah service, or about the travels, and the noon might be from the Hebrew word nafal, which means to fall. So it's, even though they fell many times in their travels, they always came back up. Even though they felt they were upside down as they were traveling, they actually were okay, and they managed to eventually reach the promised land. But Torah has all kinds of interesting things like that. Then I want to add, as a closing thing, before we go on to the next section, Ibn Ezra has a little grammatical comment on, I'm going to quickly go to that verse. You can see it. We say this at the end of every single Torah service. Uvnucho yomar, Shuva Adonai ribevot altzei Yisrael. When it halted, he would say, "Return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands." So it's kind of like, what is he basically saying? It's kind of like, anybody, what do these verses mean to you? That when the ark would set out, Moses would say, "Advance, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered." And when it halted, he would say, "Return, O Lord, you are Israel's myriads of thousands." What does that mean to you?
Does return mean that he would descend into the ark itself, or no? I mean, it's interesting that God has a location, and this is sort of antithetical to our notion of the divine, where it's locationless. But God has a location here, and somehow when they're traveling, the location is in 4 spots around them to protect them. And then when they stop, the divinity descends and hangs out in his ark. And then the operation starts again. I mean, very interesting.
Very interesting, and we'll be seeing a lot of this. But the different, we on Shavuot night we were studying at Oak Park Temple, and there was a lecture which was a little bit dry at times, but then made some really interesting points, especially later on. But we were talking about how this is what the scholars call I believe this is part of the priestly. We'll have to look it up. But there's a whole strand of belief in the Torah of that localized, powerful God. It's almost like a nuclear power, right? It's kind of like, it's almost like God is like this incredibly powerful force, and God will descend inside the ark. When God is in the ark, watch out. It's like there's nuclear radiation radiating out of it. And if you put it in front of you, you may be shielded, but the enemies, it's kind of like this explosive power. So you want it traveling in front of you, and right, it's like a powerful force that gives you energy to fight your enemies and scares your enemies away, and kind of makes everybody feel powerful, right? It's a literal, tangible force, a power among you, and that's one of the ways that we see God, which they really interesting. Because we tend to philosophize and spiritualize God as something we feel in our heart, but this is very tangible, right? This is something that turns regular soldiers into superheroes, and kind of gives everybody a lot of force, and that presence goes down and dwells in the ark, and suddenly the ark is this very powerful thing walking with us. I mean, if you're traveling through an unknown desert and you're vulnerable, that's kind of what you want, right? You want this powerful force walking with you. It's hard for me not to think of Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark.
Right.
Rabbi?
Yes, go ahead.
There was a section where they talked about clouds being on all 4 sides of the Israelis, but if they have a cloud on top and a cloud on the bottom, and you have clouds on 4 sides, you have six clouds, not 4. So
there's a whole disagreement about that, and we can look at it. But there's how many clouds were there? I'll see if I can find it. I don't want to get very technical, but there was a whole thing that 7 or 11, or it was a whole. Let's see if I can find it. I think since we're discussing it, let's see. The Ark was here. We go. There was a whole. There was a whole thing about how many clouds were there exactly.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it said they had a cloud above them and a cloud below.
The common,
But before that, it said there was clouds on all four sides. So it was a little,
Okay, here we go. This is Chizkuni. Chizkuni is a literalist, right? Chizkuni likes to take Rashi, and he's from the same school of Rashi, but some time later, and he wants to get more precise. So on the right-hand side there, Phil, would you mind reading that for us? Chizkuni's comment on the right-hand column there.
No, this is Chizkuni.
This is Chizkuni, yes.
Okay, Chizkuni.
Can you read that? Do you want me to make it
Yes,
bigger?
no, I can. I'm fine. That's
ahead.
good. Thanks very much. I was trying to see if it was the same as the Hebrew text, which I think it is. And the cloud of the Lord was above them both day and night, and both by day and by night. Regarding Rashi's commentary, that there were 7 clouds during the Israelites' journeys, they were not all mentioned in a single paragraph, as pointed out in Torah Kohanim. 4 enveloped them from the 4 directions of the globe, and 2 from above and below. The 7th traveled ahead of them. This latter one is the one mentioned here. The others are mentioned in these other places in Numbers and Exodus. According to the view of Rabbi Yehuda, there were 13 of such clouds. So Morris has gotten us into a great many clouds here, clouding this thing up terribly. 2 in each direction of the globe, 2 above and 2 below, and 1 in front of them. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yoshia, there were only 4 clouds, whereas according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, there were only 2 such clouds.
So we're getting to a big rabbinic argument, and we see what rabbis waste their time doing.
Right.
there was a cloud.
I'll never get finished.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Anybody, does it matter?
They just need something to talk about, I think.
Well, each of these numbers has some significance. Like, for example, if there's 6 of them, so one thinks of a cube, that they're enclosed within a cube. I mean, and people were into numbers having personalities in the old days. We think of number just as an abstract thing, but a number was a concrete thing. It had heft and weight, it had personality. It was distinguished from other numbers. So I could see them spending a lot of time on this.
Yeah, but 13's a bad luck number.
No, 13 is
That's a good-
echad.
that's a good
Echad.
luck.
It's the gematria of 1, actually. So in fact, when the Christians took over from the Jews, before they took over, echad, or 13 was 1, and it was a lucky number. And then the Christians took over and they converted it into an unlucky number. And that's usually what happens.
And nobody wants a floor 13 in a building.
No, that's right. That's right. But if you're Jewish, you should stick with the 13. It's a
Right.
lucky.
You're a lucky one, right?
It's 1.
I think, I guess the main point is that everybody was protected on all sides, above, below.
Right, right. And the 7th one was probably the tracker that went ahead,
Right.
like in the Old West, before the wagon trains, they always had a tracker.
And the one below-
But they didn't send one of their own. They sent another guy from a different land.
And the other one leveled and, kind of helped them travel, got rid of the scorpions. So they were really taken care of. Rashi, if you're going to travel to the desert, this is the way to travel. If we get a Land Rover or a Jeep, this is maybe even better.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Do you think this that picture of the clouds in all sides, and do you think this tradition of guardian angels on your left and your right and all of that, which which is Jewish as well as Christian. I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but do you think this might be a reflection of this, or is that from a different line?
Oh, very, very interesting. That same thought occurred to me a few seconds ago, and then we have this prayer we say when you go to sleep at night. It's in the Siddur. It's part of what's called the Shema for bed. The Shema, there's a whole little liturgy, and it's B'Shem Adonai, in the name of God, the Lord of Israel, Elohim Israel, Mimini Michael. To my right is the angel Michael, Umismoli Gabriel. To my left is Gabriel, Umilfanai Uriel. Before me is Uriel, Umiacharai Raphael. And behind me is Raphael. The Al Roshi, and over my head is the Shechina, Shechinatel, the Shechina of God.
Divine presence.
Yeah, so that's been the divine presence. So that's a prayer that's been said. I'm not sure how old that is. I would probably guess probably no longer than 500 to 800 years at the longest, but it might be longer. I'll try and look that up. But I sing that every night to my children. There's this idea of being surrounded by divine presence, and this might be where it goes back to this idea. And the later tradition likes to map out angels to all of these clouds and protective parts, so it would fit well. I think there's a good chance that this is a part of where these ideas come from. The idea of God protecting us with these clouds, and then eventually, in Second Temple times, a lot of angels suddenly start to enter the scene and become the messengers of this glory, of that protection. So that's very possible. Thanks for bringing it up. So it's not, everything's all, I think the message so far, right? Everything is all good, right? They're traveling, the scorpions are gone, the trumpets, Jethro might be with them, but you know what? And they're traveling for 3 days. Actually, I didn't bring this, but there's a whole thing about those 3 days that they traveled in 3 days, the distance of almost all the way to the promised land, because they were going so fast, and they were on the highway, so to speak. The clouds were giving them a good little push. So there's a sense of unity, of movement, but alas, it's not the only thing that's happening. And let's get to what's really happening. So Judy, would you mind reading for us?
Certainly. The people took to complaining bitterly before Adonai. Adonai heard and was incensed. A fire of Adonai broke out amongst them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to Adonai, and fire died down. Fire died down. The place was called Tabernacle because a fire of Adonai had broke out against them. The riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving, and then the Israelites wept and said, "If only we had meat to eat." We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like bdellium.
We're just going to stop here for now. So this chapter of Numbers has got a lot of attention in the last 100 years because of how much is going on here, right? We have two incidents, and the scholars will say these are two different sources or stories that were put together. I don't think it matters that much for our we'll keep it in mind, but it doesn't matter much for our analysis. But this is a very rich chapter we're about to start. So we haven't yet, what happened before, when they were traveling from the sea to Sinai and they complained to God? What would God do?
He gave them manna. He gave them water.
He listened to them pretty much. He wasn't happy, but he gave them what they wanted. What's happening here?
He's tired of listening to them complaining.
Yeah.
He's like, enough already.
Enough already. Why do you think that's changed?
because now they have the law, and now they're organized into a nation, and now they've got the protection of the Shekinah all around them in cloud form. And he's trying to shape them into a nation, and Moses is trying to shape them into a nation, and they keep backsliding.
Beautiful. And they're not only complaining, but they're complaining bitterly, right? In the Hebrew, it's mitnonenim, which by itself means complaining, but ra means evil. They're like complaining evil, really a lot. And what are they complaining about?
They want variety in their diet. I mean, if they want meat, why don't they just sacrifice one? Why don't they just butcher one of the goats or, some of the animals that they're taking along with them? They're tired of manna. Okay. I mean, this is an understandable complaint, but literally they must be really hungry.
So it seems like they're complaining about manna because we read the other part. But this seems, we could also look at this whole episode as a self-enclosed episode, right? They cry out, God stops the fire, the place gets a name, and then something else happens. Or maybe they are complaining, but it doesn't really say in that first verse, right? In that first verse, it just says that they're complaining bitterly. Let's go to some commentaries. Okay, let's see. Oh, we didn't read that bit, but that's good. Okay. Okay. Here we're going to get to Ramban Nachmanides again. Give us a nice long comment. Morris, do you mind reading for us?
No, Rabbi, the people were Thonim. Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra commented that the word Thonim is the root aven, wickedness. Similarly, the thoughts of Onish, thy evil thoughts, Jeremiah 4:14, for they spoke words of wickedness. But this is not correct. For why would Scripture have concealed their sin and not stated clearly what it was, as it does in all other places? The correct interpretation appears to me to be that as they got further away from Mount Sinai, which was near an inhabitable settlement, and entered the great and dreadful wilderness, Deuteronomy 1:19, in their first journey, they became upset and said, what shall we do? How shall we live in this wilderness? What shall we eat and what shall we drink? How shall we endure the trouble and the suffering? And when shall we come out of here? The word kamithon.
Let's just stop there.
Okay.
I think we can just stop there. I have to read all the other stuff is more detail. Let's read this next Rashi for us too, please.
All right. And the people cried unto Moses, a parable. This may be compared to the case of an earthly king who was angry with his son. And the son went to a friend of his father and said to him, go and ask forgiveness for me from my father.
What do you think? What is this? The fire part, is that what do you think of that? Is that a little harsh? It's a God, when it says God was incensed,
Yeah.
in Hebrew it says
The note.
nostrils flared.
No, they don't.
God's nostrils flared.
We're complaining. This is where Jews have always been known to be complainers. I think this is where it comes from.
Goes far back.
Yeah.
And God is God here is just fed up, and he makes a fire break out. Is God overreacting?
He doesn't know how to get him to stop.
And look, and he doesn't make it at the middle of the camp, right? He does the outskirts of the camp. He's
It's not hurting him.
it's a little warning, right? Don't get the people cry out to Moses, and Moses prays to God, and the fire dies down. This is not a natural fire, right?
Right.
Outskirts,
Bad fire.
not on the outskirts, no.
So Sforno, right? Why not the outskirts? It's localized, right?
Well, it was like God's anger.
Yeah.
That they're complaining.
Exactly. So Norma, can you read the Sforno, please?
Which one? Forno? This
Yeah.
was something supernatural, not compatible with the normal behavior of fire. Fire rises, does not sink into the earth.
That word.
But he wasn't trying to hurt them, he just was warning them.
So just like God uses supernatural miracles to feed them and to give them water, God is also happy to use supernatural miracles to give them get them a little push, right?
It's good.
So we're actually going to stop here. We're about to get into some really heavy stuff and a really powerful episode. Whole episode of the quail again and what's going to happen. And so we've started a journey. The journey started togetherness and organized, and we've run into a little trouble. Let's see how deep that trouble is and what it all means for the travels, and what we think, how it relates to human behavior and how we all are when we try and get on our journeys, our spiritual journeys. We organize ourselves, we get ourselves ready. I'm going to change. I'm going to do tshuva. I'm going to do this. And you set out on the path, and you have your obstacle. And what happens? Sometimes the first obstacle comes, and it's very easy to say, okay, well, I'll revisit my New Year resolution next year, or I'll. But sometimes we just need to keep on going. And journeys are difficult, and let's keep on reading. Thanks for joining me. See everybody in 2 weeks.